I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am Connor Ruebusch. With me is Patrick Wyman. Today we are going to be talking largely about UFC 206, but also recapping some of the excellent fights from last weekend's Tough 24 finale, which of course featured the main event between Demetrious Johnson and Tim Elliott, and a cracker of a fight between Joe Benavidez and Henry Cejudo. So that'll be coming later on today. But before we get to Holloway Pettis, which will be the main focus of our first segment, I want to note a couple of things. Last week, we released our first, I guess we'll call it, Pat, premium bonus content for people who subscribe to us on Patreon. A $3 pledge will get you access to 2 or more bonus episodes every month, and they are a little shorter than standard episodes, but we kind of let the topic unfurl as it will. Don't put a hard stop on the time it takes to discuss it, and there are no breaks or anything, so it's really just a lengthy segment of us discussing a topic that only patrons can have access to. And we picked up quite a few, so we hope that you guys enjoyed those episodes. And we want to let you know the 2 episodes will be continuing. So if you are interested in getting 50% more Heavy Hands episodes every month, that'll cost you just $3 measly. And we look forward to continuing to put those out. The other thing for our Patreon patrons I want to note is that we are ready for heavy bag questions and topic suggestions. So if you are a $5 patron on Patreon, please go on there, send us a message, or a message would be the best way. Send us a message via Patreon with a few options for questions. Give us 2 or 3 so we can choose the ones that we like the best. And if you are a $20 patron, go ahead and send us in a couple of ideas in the same vein for a 15 to 20 minute topic discussion. So any kind of fight related topic you want us to discuss, throw them at us, and we will cover the ones that we like the most. So Pat, Holloway Pettis, very important fight. Interim title, as you know, means a lot. And
like now for our listeners, whenever we say the word interim, I want you to picture us just making like a wanking motion so hard it splits the seams of space-time.
Yeah.
Like this is interim in like there is no interim. Jose Aldo won an interim belt last July. Jose Aldo still got knocked out by Conor McGregor a year ago. I love that we're just pretending that didn't happen now. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous, man.
It's no less absurd than McGregor getting an interim belt when he fought Mendez. It's just the UFC's way. You get a fight. They are now firmly stuck in the notion that pay-per-views need a title fight, even if that means not a real title fight. So
yeah, I mean, and I'm sensitive to that. I understand it. Belts really are at the end of the day promotional tools. So use your belt for whatever you want to use it for. Just don't be surprised if people catch on and in a couple of years they start treating your belts as meaningless. Like viewers of these sports are not stupid in the sense that they're not going to pay attention to that. Like they understand what even on a subconscious level, they understand what a watered down product is. So don't be surprised if there is some backlash to this. But for now, slap whatever 10-pound hunk of gold on it that you need to if you think it's going to add 20 to 30,000 buys.
Yeah, and whatever weight of gold-plated tin or aluminum, I imagine, is actually what the belt is made of. Whatever weight of metal they put on this fight, it doesn't change the fact that it is a really interesting matchup. And that the winner will face Jose Aldo, which is something we've been asking for years. Of course, Anthony Pettis and Aldo were supposed to fight a long while back. I say supposed to. They were supposed to in the way that GSP and Anderson were supposed to. In that,
no, they were actually booked.
Were they
for
really?
UFC 163? Yeah, it was going to be Pettis's featherweight debut. I don't think the fight was scheduled for very long, but it was actually scheduled.
Well, there you go.
It would have been August 2013. It was the fight that ended up being Aldo versus Chan Sung Jung. Just a weird fight and a weird card overall.
Yeah, so it actually was supposed to happen. It may happen if Pettis wins here. And Holloway, of course, has been the guy for the last year or two knocking at the door. and trying to get to that title shot. 9 straight wins, I think, now on his resume. I think it's the longest in the division by a pretty good stretch. So, yeah, fantastic fight. Listeners of the show will know that we are huge fans of Max Holloway. And so let's get into it. Pat, overall thoughts on this matchup?
I think it's a fantastic matchup. Absolutely awesome, fantastic matchup. I love both of these guys so deeply. Like, Anthony Pettis was my first favorite fighter when I started watching MMA. Like, because I remember watching that MTV World of Jenks documentary on him, and I was just fascinated by the guy. And then watching him hit the Showtime kick, like, I have always been a mark for Anthony Pettis. You're
gonna have to tell me what the World of Jenks is.
It was like a short form documentary series on MTV. It was like they were like 30-minute documentaries.
And they did one on Pettis?
Yeah, this would have been back in like 2010.
Cool. Had no idea.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Like, it was an interesting little show that they did. And yeah, so that was how I learned about Pettis, and that was right as I was getting into MMA. So, like, I have always had and will always have a soft spot for Pettis. But Holloway is also one of my very favorite guys to watch. I love everything about his game. I think he's a cutting edge fighter in every possible way. And unfortunately for Pettis, I think that's kind of the problem with this matchup is how on the cutting edge Holloway is, how good his fundamentals are, how much volume he throws. I think all of those things are going to be very serious problems for Pettis.
Yeah, so let's talk about Pettis, because we've had some not exactly kind words about Pretty Tony's the lack of development in the past. You may even want to call it regression if you're contrasting it with the way that the rest of MMA seems to be moving forward. What do you see about his game that is not cutting edge?
Well, so I think let's take a step back here real quick. Like, the basic problem with Anthony Pettis's game is that he ends up getting put on the fence a lot.
Yeah.
And the problem isn't really his defensive wrestling. It's not really his clinch game. It's not even really a sense of urgency in getting out of those situations, though he could stand to be a little more urgent about creating space and breaking off. The problem is that he gets put there so much in the first place.
Yeah.
It's like those things, like, people talk about, oh, he gets taken down too much. Oh, he gets held against the fence too much. Like, no, it's that he gets put there too much in the first place. Those are symptoms, not the cause of Anthony Pettis's woes.
It's overall, it's a problem of ring craft, or cage craft, if you will. And that leads to, the way I see it, that sort of exacerbates the smaller, more specific technical issues that Pettis has. You know, problems in his defense, problems with his wrestling, those become exacerbated because he is fighting poorly. The tactics become a problem because the strategy is bad. And he can't put himself in a winning position often enough that he can cover up those flaws. That we've seen him cover up those flaws very effectively in a lot of fights. It's just now it's kind of been revealed. I will say maybe the one fight that doesn't follow that, it was his loss to Edson Barboza, where he was not put against the fence a lot, and it really was that was the one where we've seen the ring craft be an issue, and then suddenly we saw that the technique was really an issue too.
Yeah, well, so that was the secondary. That's the secondary piece of this. It's that Pettis does not have outstanding fundamentals.
Yeah,
and he doesn't quite throw enough. Like, he doesn't focus enough on scoring. Yeah. So that's kind of why, like, Pettis is kind of an old school fighter in some regards. Like, he's not really a combination striker. He doesn't really work that fast. He kind of lets the fight come to him. He's very much kind of a flowy fighter in the way that like Anderson Silva in the latter stages of his career was kind of a flowy fighter, or Shogun Hua was always a flowy fighter. I think, like, he kind of let you fight the kind of fight that you wanted, and he was gonna respond to that in a lot of different ways.
And frankly, I think that if we went back to when Anderson was young, let's say 36, the young Anderson, and we brought him into this era, he might struggle with the current crop of middleweights too, because that is a difficult style. I think waiting on that finishing blow, and sort of relying on your opponent to be too worried about what you're trying to do to fight to their game plan, that is working less and less these days.
Yeah, exactly. And so kind of if we look at the broad outlines of Pettis's career, it's not like this is a new development. He's kind of always struggled to win decisions. Like, every decision he's ever been in basically has been close. Yeah. Whether it was the first fight with Benson Henderson or the kind of weird loss to Bart Palashevsky, which was still a robbery. I don't like People don't remember that these days, but that was not that close a fight, and Pettis should have won that. But even that was closer than it should have been. Like the fight with Jeremy Stevens was really, really close, which is not really remembered now. The fight with Clay Guida, like obviously he got controlled in that, and that was like, but that was still a pretty close fight. Like he struggles to create separation and just score. Like that's kind of his weakness. He's better about the volume now. I think like look at the he scored more in the Alvarez fight. He scored more in the Barboza fight than he would have a few years ago. But he's not a volume striker, and he's never going to be.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes records tell an interesting story, and the story I get perusing Anthony Pettis' record right now is that of the 4 decisions he has won. He is a guy, obviously, with a lot of finishes. Knockouts and submissions account for most of his wins. But in the 4 decisions he has won, 3 of them were splits. And that kind of implies what we're saying here. That kind of that's a symptom of what we're saying here, that he has a difficulty of putting his stamp on the fight in any way other than a finish. If he doesn't get you out of there, the rounds are going to be close.
Yeah, even the one unanimous decision he won was over Benson Henderson, and that was basically a tied fight going into the Showtime kick. With like a minute left.
That would have been a split if the rounds weren't so clearly divided. You know, if it wasn't like very well known that both guys had 2 rounds going into the 5th, and that Pettis clearly won it, it would have been a split too, because it was that closely contested of a fight.
Yeah. So that's all a roundabout way of saying that like this is not to undersell Pettis, or we're not hating on him, like lest we get these comments in the YouTube video, which I'm sure we will. Because it's just, we have to understand what Pettis is and how he actually fights. Like being like kind of having some illusions about this at this point. Like if we were talking about, oh yeah, Pettis can go out there and just handily win decisions. That's not who he is as a fighter. He's exceptionally quick. He's exceptionally athletic. He hits ridiculously hard, especially with his kicks. He has insane killer instinct, some of the best killer instinct I think in the history of the sport. Pettis has, but that type of game just does not lend itself to winning decisions. It just doesn't. And that is a structural flaw in his game.
It feels like kind of the old school Jackson Winklejohn approach, where his whole style, the way that Anthony Pettis approaches fights, is very much built on his innate physical capabilities, his dexterity, his speed, his power, his timing. It's built on those, and that the fundamentals are not there. And so we're seeing once again something akin to the Roy Jones Jr. situation, where a guy without a lot of fundamentals, either he starts to lose a step physically, or he starts facing opponents who can adjust to the fact that he is very athletic and fast and everything. And you start to see the holes in the technical side of his game more. And I think that's what the Edson Barboza fight was. I think both the Alvarez and Dos Anjos fights were really problems of ringcraft, but then Edson Barboza really showed that there are other small things wrong with Pettis' game. And I think those two things are inextricably linked, that he has relied on this athletic ability for basically the duration of his career. Even making small and smart adjustments over the course of his career, has never quite figured out how to fight like he isn't already better than everyone.
Yeah, there's like the superstructure of his game has evolved, right? Like what you see kind of above the water, like has evolved over the years. Like his hands are much crisper than they used to be. He throws better combinations. He switches stances more. His variety of kicks is still incredible, but he's more judicious about when and how he throws them. Like all of these things have evolved, but the underlying things, like his footwork, the kind of basic ability to cut angles, to pivot, to move precisely, to not move more than he has to be efficient, which is the root of the problem with his ringcraft. Those things have not changed. Yeah. Like he is still more or less the same fighter he was back in 2010. Like the rest of it, don't be fooled by what your eye is drawn to. Look at the basics, look at the meat and potatoes, and that's kind of the inherent flaw of Anthony Pettis. And like, frankly, as a way of segueing, I don't think there is anybody better in this division aside from maybe Jose Aldo, but maybe not even him, who is better equipped to take advantage of those flaws than Max Holloway.
Yeah, at least on the feet. I mean, there are probably people who in this division who might be able to control Pettis with the wrestling in sort of an Alvarez way and maybe be a little more effective in doing so. But as far as someone who can pressure Pettis, throw enough volume to win the rounds, be durable and unflappable while keeping Pettis where he is least effective, it's Max Holloway. It's absolutely Max Holloway. I agree with you. So let's talk about Max then. 9 straight wins now in a row. Obviously very impressive. It's kind of hard to say whether this will be his biggest win yet or not. I might say that is Ricardo Lamas his highest ranked win officially? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so, but look at or Swanson at the time, actually, I think.
Okay, maybe, yeah. So the record itself is not like it doesn't really stand out in any specific way for each individual win, but the totality of it is that Max Holloway has been fighting a lot of people around the top 10 for the last 2 years and has beaten all of them, usually very impressively. And how has he done that? Why don't you go ahead and lay out the basics of Holloway's game as you see it?
Well, so it's fundamentals. It's exceptional footwork, really, really tight, crisp, technical footwork, and it's volume, basically. Volume, and it's volume. But there's also like a lot of craft and just the way that he puts his combinations together. Like he's really adept at feinting to set things up. He does a really good job of moving your hands around. He does a good job of messing with your rhythm. So he'll kind of set a rhythm and then he'll break it. He's really good at like taking half beats in the middle of his combination, getting you to react or cover up, and then responding to that in kind of an organic fashion. Like he's the rare, really organic striker who still puts a lot of volume on you. Like usually organic strikers kind of tend to pick and choose their shots. They tend to work slow. They're trying to read you and react to you. Holloway does all that, but in a proactive way, and in a way that leads to him throwing and landing a ton of shots over the course of the fight.
It kind of occurs to me that he's kind of reverse Anthony Pettis in a way. Max Holloway started off as a guy who was really just fundamentally sound as a striker. He lacked other parts of the game, and that was a problem. But it was really, as far as his striking, which is the bulk of his approach, was concerned, he was really fundamental. That was true all the way back in his fight with Dennis Bermudez, which was a robbery, one that Holloway absolutely should have won. And he did a remarkable job of sort of just outboxing Dennis Bermudez. And that's impressive in its own regard, denying a wrestler like Dennis Bermudez the chance to force you into a wrestling match for a significant portion of the fight. But over time, Max Holloway has added the sort of weirdness, the eccentricity, and the weird, flowy, dynamic striking. And we've seen that more in his later fights. That really, in early career Holloway, the only indulgence maybe was his spinning back kick, which is a thing he's been throwing for a long time. Everything else is basic boxing. But then you maybe fast forward to the era of the Cub-Swanson fight, and things are really weird. You have the fundamentals, but you have a lot of stance switching. You have these sort of weird, stuttery steps into opposite stances, into the pocket, changing angles as you do so. You have more elbows, a wider variety of spinning attacks. All of these things just sort of studded into the basic fundamental game. And so he's the reverse of Anthony Pettis. He started out as someone who was not an amazing athlete, but just had solid fundamentals, and has, as his confidence has soared, has kind of become a guy who is more of a natural fighter, somebody who can break the rules quite often and knows how to get away with it.
Yeah, if you look at Holloway's early career, like how was he hurting guys? How was he finishing them? It was with body shots. It was because he was so crisp with his shots. He would force you to cover up upstairs and then he would go downstairs. Like it was just really basic meat and potatoes type of stuff.
Yeah.
But as you noted, Connor, it was all built on this really strong fundamental foundation. That's why Holloway's takedown defense has always been so good. It's not because he's like a physically overpowering guy who athletes his way out of everything.
Yeah, not at all.
It's perfect fundamentals. Picture perfect. Like if you were going to teach takedown defense, you would just show video of Max Holloway like stuffing the head against the fence over and over and over again.
It's almost he's like Aldo with his feeding the single and then limp legging out. Holloway has found a way to basically defend takedowns almost exactly the same way every time. And the first layer, just like Aldo, the first layer of that is distance management and effective striking, feinting, and movement.
Angles too.
Yeah, angles. Yeah, just basically keeping the person from getting into wrestling range in the first place. But once he's locked into a takedown attempt, it's overhook, a little bit of head mashing, and then a well-timed sidestep. And then your back is to the fence, and he starts unleashing the volume again.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, it's really interesting you bring up Aldo, because I think that the key thing there is the sidestep. That's what we don't see a lot, I think, in takedown defense outside of the very highest levels.
Yeah.
Is like it's not just that you stuff the initial shot. It's not just that you grab a hold either of the overhook, the underhook, whatever is going to be your preferred method of defending this takedown, depending on what the shot is. It's that you're creating new angles from which to escape.
Yeah.
Like that's what Aldo and Holloway do, I think, better than just about anybody with their takedown defense. Like they're never defending shots straight on. Like this isn't the old school Vanderlei Silva, like meet you head on style of sprawl and brawl, or what Chuck Liddell used to do.
Yeah.
It's as soon as they latch onto you, you're creating a new angle. You're creating a new, you're redirecting their momentum constantly.
You take the drive out of the takedown. It's not like a punch where one side step, it misses. A takedown has a pretty wide cone of effect, where if they get their hands on you, they can keep driving even if you've stepped off to the side a bit. But if you continue to take that angle away, you need that direct line, right across the crotch of your opponent, across that weak plane. And if you don't get it, it's very difficult to finish a shot. And Holloway, like Aldo, is all about creating that angle after stuffing. Of course, that won't necessarily be an issue against Pettis.
No, it won't.
I don't think Pettis is going to try to take him. He may try to take him down, but I don't think he'll succeed, because Holloway has stuffed takedowns from much better wrestlers like Lamas, Stevens, men like that.
What's really interesting to me about Holloway's takedown defense game, or I think more broadly speaking, his anti-wrestling game at this point, is that it's not just that he stuffs the shots, it's that he does what Aldo used to do back when Aldo fought Kenny Florian. He did this a couple of times, that he is going to stuff your shot and then force and then turn it into a takedown of his own. He's going to turn that into top position. Holloway likes to do that with the front headlock. So if you shoot on him, he will grab a hold of a guillotine and use that to sweep to top position. But he's also doing it just by kicking your legs out from under you and winding up in the top, breaking your base down with head control, and then getting on top.
Yeah, and he does something similar with strikes. It's that whole idea of disincentivization, where the person fails in a takedown, the opponent, you're ready to attack. He doesn't always. He's a fairly good clinch fighter, but he doesn't always do it in the same way as our favorite Ioane and Jacek, who always comes up when we discuss this topic. But he does tend to, more like Aldo, kind of embarrass you a little bit after you fail on a takedown, where you'll get stuffed, he'll sidestep, and you're just kind of left there holding your arms out with no leg between them, and then he just kind of starts hitting you while your back is to the fence. He kind of puts this exclamation point, a very visible statement of dominance, basically, after stuffing the takedown.
Yeah, that's very Joanna-esque, right?
Sure, yeah.
That not only do you stuff the takedown, you find an opportunity to land a few shots in there, which Aldo at this point doesn't really do. I think because he's probably trying to conserve energy, he just stuffs the shot. And
well, also somehow he doesn't have to. Like, just the fact that you can't take him down is disincentivization enough. You just feel like an ass for being a great wrestler and just having every single attempt effortlessly shucked aside. So that works too. It's like fighting with Aldo. It's like fighting like a Benitez or a Pernell Whitaker, where they don't even need to counter you. You just keep missing so much that you lose heart. Like, I can't hit them. I can't get them to the ground. So matchup wise, we spent a long time talking about Holloway's takedown defense, even though
even though it's not super relevant to this matchup. I don't think we've gotten to talk about it in depth before, and it's awesome. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, very true. So matchup wise, you've basically already kind of let the cat out of the bag, but I think both of us favor Holloway here for better ring craft, better volume, and a lot of durability to fall back on if he needs it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't want to undersell Pettis' chances here, because he is still exceptionally explosive, exceptionally dangerous, and he can finish the fight at any given point. It's just that Holloway is real tough. Holloway is rawhide tough, man. A really, really, really durable fighter. Yeah. And that's kind of a rough draw for Pettis in that regard. Like, Holloway doesn't have a glass liver like Donald Cerrone. No. He doesn't have he's not aging the way that Gilbert Melendez was. He's not going to be super athletically outmatched the way that some of Pettis, the way that like Charles Oliveira was. Sure. Also, Holloway isn't going to give Pettis transitions and scrambles to work his I don't think to work his grappling game in any meaningful way. No. So that makes this basically probably a pure striking matchup. And in that context, Holloway's diverse footwork, like the different things that Holloway can do with his footwork, is going to come into play. I think he's going to walk Pettis down, back him up to the fence over and over and over again, and kind of just outwork him. I expect Pettis to get his licks in. Even in a fight like that, Pettis is still exceptionally dangerous and still finish. But I think that he's just giving up way too much volume. I expect this to be like a 49-46 or 50-45 decision with the significant strike stats looking kind of ridiculous. Like 100, like I expect Holloway to land like 120 strikes and Pettis to land 60, So I expect him to get doubled up.
What if Anthony Pettis can't make it through the 4th and 5th rounds? Because that weight cut did not make him look particularly great in his last fight against Oliveira. He kind of gassed pretty quickly into the fight, actually. He managed to fight well despite it, but he definitely looked tired going into the 3rd round.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real problem, but I just think Pettis is so tough. Like, we talk about, because we call him Pretty Tony and because his game is pretty finesse-oriented, because he likes to be kind of a rangy kicker, I don't think Pettis gets enough credit for his raw durability. Yeah. He pulls out of a lot of fights, he gets injured a lot, but once he is in the cage, Anthony Pettis is granite. Dude took some unbelievable shots from Rafael dos Anjos in that fight. He took some big ass shots from Edson Barboza. Like, that dude is super tough.
He's never been knocked out, and I don't know that I've actually even seen him really shaken up. I don't think he was ever even really staggering on his feet when he fought RDA, despite all the shots that were landed. Nor Barboza with all those clean left hooks. And he didn't even react to Barboza's leg kicks. He's definitely a tough guy. And that gives him an out in this fight, because being such a potent finisher against a fighter in Max Holloway who at any point could become a little too confident for his own good.
Holloway is not a defensive mastermind. I don't know that Pettis is the guy to really exploit that, because so much of Pettis's offense is kick based. I think Holloway only exchanges when he thinks he has an edge. Sure. And so I think if he is this. Somebody like Aldo or even Ricardo Lamas maybe was better equipped to exploit Holloway's kind of basic limited defense inside the pocket. Like, Holloway's defense depends, like Pettis's, on distance and angles. And so when he brawls, he can find himself in some trouble. But I just don't know that Pettis has the power or the craft in the pocket to be the one to exploit it.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I'm going to say Max Holloway by late finish. I think he may get Pettis. If Pettis gasses, I think there are few people less welcoming to an exhausted opponent in the 4th and 5th rounds than Max Holloway. Granted, we haven't seen Max Holloway in the 4th and 5th rounds, but I've also never seen him looking tired in the 3rd. He always looks fresh, despite throwing a lot of volume. So I think a late finish may be in the cards, but Pretty Tony deserves credit for being so goddamn tough. And either way, it should be a really interesting fight, and I can't wait to see either of these guys fight Jose Aldo. That is a dream come true. So I'm looking forward to whatever happens in the aftermath of this one, and I'm looking forward to a brief break right now. So let's take that, and when we come back, we want to talk about a couple other fights from UFC 206, namely, what was it, Pat? Cerrone Brown, Cub Swanson versus Duho Choi.
And Cub Swanson versus Duho Choi. The man, the myth, the legend, Duho Choi.
We will talk about
Korean
those
Superboy
when we come back. And then at the end of the show, don't forget, we are going to be discussing Demetrius Johnson's win over Tim Elliott and Joseph Benavidez's somewhat controversial win over Henry Cejudo. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. First thing I want to ask you, Pat, before we get into this next fight is a simple question. Can a liver tear in half? And then you're supposed to say, like tissue paper, Connor, like tissue paper. Because, yes, it is indeed the battle of the tissue paper livers welterweight matchup between Donald Cerrone and Matt Brown, two men well known for being finishable by body shots. Certainly, momentum is on Cerrone's side at this point, but it should still be a very fun fight. It kind of pains me to see, as a Cincinnati boy, it does pain me a bit to see Matt Brown sort of stumbling here over the last, I guess, year or two of his career, but still always in entertaining fights. What's your take on this matchup?
It is a really interesting matchup, and it's going to be a test of where both guys are in their careers, I think, because Brown presents some of the same challenges that Kelvin Gastelum would have had that fight gone through at UFC 205, in the sense that he is going to be the first a big, strong pressure fighter who's going to try to barrel him down. Brown is faster on his feet than Rick Story was, not as fast as Gastelum, not as athletic as Gastelum, but bigger. Whereas Rick Story was slower, kind of more plodding, and also smaller, didn't have a long reach. Was also a southpaw, which exacerbated his reach disadvantage in that fight. Brown can cover the distance quickly, can really get in on him, and can test the improvements that Cerrone's made. That's what makes this an intriguing matchup.
He does have that uncanny ability to hit you on the end of a punch, at a range where you kind of thought he couldn't hit you, and still managing to hurt you with that shot. That's Matt Brown's weird power that he has in those awkward, long, flailing exchanges. Matt is certainly, I think, stylistically the more limited of the two here. Even if Donald Cerrone has had his issues with people, with starting slow and everything, I think he is still the more adaptable fighter, which is why, even though we talk about him as being a guy who is completely and concretely a guy who loses in the first round, he has very few first-round losses on his record, because a lot of those times he has a bad first round and then comes back to at least compete and more often than not win the fight. Whereas Matt is really kind of the same guy from one round to the next, no matter what happens. He's got a good, diverse striking skill set. He's a lot more confident in his grappling ability than he used to be, which I think is a big reason why it's been so much more effective. But he is really, really defined by pressuring tactics. That is Matt Brown. He comes forward, and when he's not coming forward, he looks not happy.
God awful.
He looks pretty bad when he's forced to fight off the back foot. He looks very hittable. He looks tentative. He does not have that same confidence. When he can get that momentum going, though, he is one of the most dangerous guys in this division.
Yeah, because he is a pure pressure fighter, as close to a pure pressure fighter as exists in this division. But he's also, and this kind of exacerbates his normal tendencies, he's also a swarmer, right? And we've talked in the past about the extent to which those are two distinct things. Like Nick Diaz likes to pressure, but really he just swarms you when your back hits the fence. Brown is both somebody who always wants to push your back to the fence, and when your back hits the fence, he is going to absolutely maul you. In a variety of different ways. So, but I think there are few fighters in MMA, aside from maybe Rafael dos Anjos, and actually no, I would say Brown, more than anybody else in MMA, depends on forward pressure, and he depends on having the fence. Everything he does depends on having that fence. So this is going to test whether Cerrone's improved footwork, whether his improved counters, his improved reactive takedowns, his better work in the pocket, his more efficient sense of distance, whether all of those things are real improvements or whether they're going to fall apart under the sustained pressure assault of Matt Brown.
Kind of feel like we've been saying that for the past several matchups for Donald Cerrone. Now we'll get to see if maybe the pressure will get to him. And I am losing faith in the idea that just a pressuring welterweight will be enough to beat Cerrone at this point, even as dangerous a pressuring welterweight as Matt Brown.
Yeah, I think I was going to pick Gastelum because I was not entirely sold on Cerrone's improvements. I am going to pick Cerrone over Brown because I think Brown is limited in ways that Gastelum was not. Like Gastelum's young, durable, super athletic, super quick, works at an exceptional pace, can mix in wrestling, has pop in his hands. I think Brown is, and this is kind of the subtext to this matchup, is Brown is, I would say, on the downside of his career. He's lost 4 of his last 5, albeit against excellent competition, aside from Jake Ellenberger, I guess. But it seems fairly clear to me that Brown is just not quite the fighter he used to be, especially in terms of durability. And I think Cerrone is going to test that to a great extent.
I mean, I think his durability is still there as far as chin. It's possibly fading a bit, but his recoverability is still very good. The body shots, however, have been an issue, a really big issue for several years now. And what I really want to see from this fight, Pat, is just both guys hurting each other with body kicks over and over for like 2 rounds straight. I just want to see both guys kicking each other in the liver and seeing whose liver is weaker. That's all I want from this matchup.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when they lock up with each other, right? Because
man, I hope we see it. Matt Brown's clinch is phenomenal. No matter what you can say about the limitations of Brown's game, he has some of the very best pure Muay Thai in the clinch in all of MMA. He is phenomenal with his sort of pick your poison switch ups, whether it's keeping your hips away and eating knees, or keeping your hips close and accepting his really slick Muay Thai style takedowns. And then being hit on your way back up, or worrying about those 2 things so much that you don't realize he's about to elbow you in the temple. He just has this really well-developed, layered game in the clinch that very few, like really the only person I can think of off the top of my head who compares is Demetrius Johnson, who has that kind of ability to just swim through the opponent's defensive reactions in the clinch.
Who always seems to be kind of a step ahead of you in the clinch.
Right, exactly.
The only guy who has really competed with Matt Brown in that phase is another highly underrated clinch fighter, Robbie Lawler.
Yeah,
and even Robbie managed to get himself in some trouble when he stayed there for too long.
Robbie got hurt in the clinch, so it's not a place that most people want to be. And Donald Cerrone's not a terrible clinch fighter, but I still think it's probably one of the, if you were to pick a specific area of expertise, a specific range, it's probably one of his weakest, being in the clinch, and really has been saved by his height and all that. But when somebody just kind of lets go, as we saw in his fight with Eddie Alvarez, I think he's still kind of vulnerable there. So if he does tie up with Matt Brown, who is physically strong, powerful, and very skilled in that range, I think that will make the fight very, very interesting and competitive. At range, however, it's kind of hard for me to just not see Donald Cerrone kicking Matt Brown a lot and jabbing him a lot. I see both of those things happening in great deal. And if he can get Matt Brown taking a few backward steps at a time, then Cerrone has every opportunity to put together one of those Street Fighter combinations and end his night.
Yeah, I think I'm expecting Cerrone to hurt Brown with strikes and then hop on him and submit him.
Sure.
Like that's, or alternatively, it would not really surprise me all that much if Brown came out of the gate charging forward, Cerrone hit him with a reactive takedown and finished him early.
Yeah,
like
just takes him down and immediately taps him. That could happen. Yeah,
like he did to Alex Oliveira. That would not terribly surprise me.
His wrestling is not bad, Matt Brown, and I think it's gotten markedly better as he's focused more on it in the later years of his career. But Cerrone has such great timing with that reactive shot that it has worked against some really solid defensive wrestlers. And Brown being so tied to the idea of pressuring his opponent, there's really nothing you can do about the fact that you can mitigate the risk, but it always puts you at greater risk of being hit with a takedown. We saw that with DJ versus Elliott. You can be a really great scrambler and whatever, but if you're constantly coming forward, you're going to be more hittable and you're going to be easier to take down. So I see probably, I kind of see that happening. I'm not sure that Cerrone can finish Brown really quickly. So I kind of see this one going to the second round, and we get to see a little more of Brown's pressure and clinch game being more effective. But I think ultimately Cerrone probably hurts him, likely with a body shot, and then wraps up a choke. That's my pick.
Yep. I got Cerrone by submission in the second round.
Yep. That sounds about right to me. Okay, next up on the docket, let's go ahead and talk about the featherweight matchup. Cub Swanson, another guy on the downside of his career, but he is fulfilling a much-needed role right now as the name opponent for an up-and-comer. And that up-and-comer is the Korean Superboy, Doo-Ha Choy. Pat, I know you were excited to talk about this guy, so I'm going to let you take it away.
Ooh, Doo-Ha Choy. Oh, my God. Yeah, the Korean Superboy. I love his game because we've talked a lot on this show over the years about aggressive counterpunchers. It's probably my favorite single type of fighter to watch. And that is when Doo-Ha Choy is on, that is Doo-Ha Choy. He's going to walk you down. He's got good tools for walking his way into the pocket. He's got a really nice jab. He throws really nice, sharp kicks. But it's once he gets you reacting to those things, once he gets you throwing back at him, that he really shines. He puts together fantastic combinations. He has enormous go-to-sleep power in both hands. He even likes to counter with things like flying knees. It's a really diverse, technical, crisp, and dangerous counterpunching game. So I've just been a big fan of his for a very long time. It's nice to see him finally healthy enough to fight reasonably regularly. And I think this is his time. I think he's been a really promising guy for a long time. Had our eye on him for quite a while, going back to like 2012, 2013 or so. So I think this is his time to take a step up.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's not a tough stylistic matchup for him, but it could be one if Cub Swanson is on that forces Choy to work a little bit, to be a little resourceful. And could end up being, I think there's a possibility that Swanson could end up kind of spoiling Doo-Ha Choy's big step onto the stage, onto the big stage, because that aggressive counterpunching is really great, but there are a couple things that make it a risky choice of style for Doo-Ha Choy. If it is a choice, style is not a choice. I think we should all acknowledge that. You know, it's the 21st century, Pat. Style is not a choice. But
born this way.
He was born an aggressive counterpuncher. God damn it. I just wish. Oh, I stepped on it. I wish I could take that "born this way" as just a little soundbite to just put into other episodes. Just randomly you saying those words.
Born this way.
Damn it! I'm stepping on it all. Let's hear it one more time.
Born this way.
Very good. All right, we are going to be using that all the time in coming weeks. So the problem with Doo-Ha Choy is, to be an aggressive counter fighter, you want to have some pretty solid defense. You want to be able to lull that stuff out. You want to be able to make the guy miss and then counter him. And Choi's defense still needs work. He's young. There's time, but he's pretty upright. He tends to just kind of throw when you throw. That's kind of his go-to method. And he's got such great accuracy and timing and huge power in his hands that it works. But against somebody who is a smart, crafty veteran, somebody who might, say, feint him and get him to lead, he is there to be hit. And his choice of being aggressive to set up those counters means, he's there to be hit often because he's trying to close that distance. And then the other thing is sort of the non-athletic side, the intellectual aspect of counterpunching. There is both an athletic and an intellectual side to it, where you need to have great timing and speed and probably some good power to be an effective counterpuncher. Those are the athletic things. You need to be able to find those shots and execute, at half a moment's notice when the opening arises. But the intellectual side comes when the opponent is smart enough that you need to set them up for your counters. You need to draw out the openings. You need to feint them. You need to touch them. You need to make them worried enough that they throw in desperation, and you need to have an idea of what they're going to do when they feel desperate so you can anticipate and counter. And I'm not sure, maybe you can disagree with this, Pat, but I'm not sure if Doo-Ha Choy has that yet. I think he's really, really banking on the physical advantage of, like a young Anthony Pettis, being really fast, having great timing and power, and being tough, these sort of innate things. And I don't know that he has yet developed the ability. He's not a Max Holloway, you know what I mean? Who is like old beyond his years as far as fighting intellect goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the core, at his core, Choy is a brawler. Choy wants to go out and wing punches in the pocket,
Sure.
and he still falls into that habit from time to time.
Yeah,
like that is what Choy is. The fact that he is an aggressive counterpuncher is that's what he's been kind of honed into by his coaches and his trainers, and probably by learning a few hard lessons along the way. Mm-hmm. That is the kind of baseline thing for Doo-Ha Choy. But I will say this, because he has not fought a full 5 minutes in his 3 UFC fights, I don't think we know how much craft Doo Ho Choy has to his game, because we've only seen him fight 5 minutes in the last 3 years.
That's true.
Like,
that is true.
I don't think we're really qualified to say exactly how much depth Doo Ho Choy has to his game. I mean, I think at the end of the day, yes, Swanson could play spoiler here, because Swanson has incredible depth of skill. He's got great timing, despite the fact that he has lost a step and looks like he's having a little more trouble pulling the trigger than he used to. That's like the clearest sign of Swanson's decline for me. It's not that his hand speed is any slower, or he's any less explosive, or he hits any less hard. It's that the opportunities are there, and he's just a split second slower in exploiting them than he used to be. I think he also does not take a great punch. He never took a great punch. And now it's like clear that it is not that hard to wobble him. That is why, more than anything else, even leaving aside the whatever skill gap might exist, like, this is just the wrong matchup for a guy with a declining chin and whose reflexes are slowing. A fast, accurate, vicious puncher.
The thing that gives me pause is that Cub Swanson has always been an inconsistent fighter. You know, whether from one round to the next or one fight to the next. That sort of 6-fight winning streak that put him in the top 10 of this division, or the top 5 of this division, back ending in 2014, was a pretty strange thing for a guy who was kind of win-loss for many years before that, and has kind of gone back to that. But even in the performances, Cub Swanson is always a guy who can have a bad round where he's like, he's not setting things up. He kind of doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He's throwing a lot of weird kicks and stuff. And then the next round, he's on his jab, he's moving, he's feinting, he's making you look bad and making you miss. And I'm thinking maybe in like the Jeremy Stevens fight. We're not far removed from that. That was only 2 years ago. And that was a fight that showed us both Cub Swansons, a fight that Jeremy Stevens was winning significant portions of, and Cub Swanson had to kind of settle down and be technical to win. And I know he can do it when he needs to. And I'm not confident that Doo Ho Choy is on that Max Holloway level where he can really take Swanson out of his element so concretely, you know, so soundly that he can't sort of decide at some point to get smarter and more technical and make Choy work. I do still think it's a matchup that I will pick Choy to win. But I have my eye open basically for Swanson to be. Choy strikes me as one of those fighters. This is a prospect thing where he's gonna lose, and it may look kind of bad at some point soon. He's gonna have to, I think, kind of learn a lesson at some point about, you know, from a veteran. He's gonna have to learn from an established fighter, and this could be that fight.
See, I also think that that's going to happen to Choy, but I don't think that Swanson is the guy to do it.
I don't think so either. I'm not picking him, but I suspect that he could do it for brief portions.
I expect it to be somebody more like Ricardo Lamas.
Sure,
or basically somebody who can shoot a real nice double on him and kind of hold him down. And I expect Choy in that kind of fight to look kind of ineffectual.
Yeah.
But Swanson is a guy who has always had some takedowns. Like, I think if Swanson comes out and has like a really nice, diverse game plan, then he can win rounds and kind of stifle Choy. But like, I don't think he wants to be in a firefight with Choy. At the end of the day, kind of the problem with Swanson in his career has always been his greatest strength. It's his creativity and his willingness to try wild stuff, and his deep confidence in himself, in his power, his athleticism, and his craft to bail him out. Mm-hmm. And I think you just don't want to be in a firefight with Doo Ho Choy ever. Yeah. And I think that Swanson is going to engage him one too many times and pay for it.
Yeah, that could very well happen. Like, he'll feel he has to put a stamp on it. He has to go in there and prove that he's there to fight, and that is not something you want to do with the Korean Superboy. So that does it for this segment, Pat. When we come back, we're going to talk about Demetrius Johnson versus Tim Elliott. Surprisingly competitive, very interesting fight. And Joseph Benavidez versus Henry Cejudo, two great advertisements for the flyweight division that unfortunately were settled onto a tough finale that probably no one cared about, but both great fights that deserve to be talked about. So we will cover those after this break. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Heavy Hands, welcome back. Demetrius Johnson, Tim Elliott. Well, Pat, we should have discussed this during the break, but do you want to talk about that first or Cejudo Benavidez?
Let's talk about Demetrius Johnson versus Tim Elliott first. I think because I don't know, you described this as kind of a closer competitive fight, and I think that we've got a lot of challenger bias floating around.
Oh, sure.
Floating around as this fight was happening and in the aftermath.
Well, also speaking relatively, Pat. I mean, what does a competitive fight with Demetrius Johnson look like? It looks like that.
That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
I'm very much with that. I think the Elliott had himself a great first round and gave it everything he had, and then after that he got repeatedly taken down and controlled on the mat for the next 20 minutes.
The momentum was lost to him pretty utterly after the second. I actually, and a couple other people did, I gave Elliott the third round because Demetrius Johnson was completely controlling him, had the momentum, but didn't do anything, where Elliott was hitting him and attacking submissions from the bottom. But I know most people didn't do that. And in either way, it was still in the midst of a dramatic momentum shift for Demetrius Johnson. You know, like winning one round in there, it was pretty clear after it that he wasn't going to win another because Demetrius Johnson was figuring him out. And I feel pretty good about my prediction for this fight, Pat. My prediction was that Tim Elliott did not have a great chance of winning, but that he would give Demetrius Johnson one or two of the most entertaining rounds he's had the chance to provide in some time. And I think he did. I think the first few rounds of this, with the drama of Elliott doing better than expected, all of the scrambling, and then for, you know, sort of hardcore fans who like to see the technical progression, just watching Demetrius Johnson neutralize everything that gave him difficulty in round one over the course of the next four was really, really, it was just a satisfying fight in every way. You had action, you had drama, and then you had just this chess mastery of technical fighting.
You know, one thing that occurred to me after I watched this was not as I was watching it, but afterwards, as I was kind of thinking about it, was Demetrius Johnson is a guy who thrives on predictability, right? Because of the way his mind works, because he's such an analytical, organized thinker. Something that came through very clearly when you and I interviewed him earlier this year. Yeah, like he thinks about things in a very systematic fashion, and he thinks very quickly. And his greatness, I think, more than anything else, is predicated on him being able to figure out what you're doing because he puts all the clues together, right? He puts together your timing, he puts together your tells, he puts that together with all of his training and all the study that he and his coaches have done and everything that he's absorbed. So, like, not only does he think really fast, he has an incredible depth of knowledge about you to draw on that he can then apply in very quick fashion. So that makes somebody like Tim Elliott, who is an anti-rhythm fighter, who has no real rhythm, a much harder challenge for him, paradoxically, than someone like Henry Cejudo, who's so fast and so fluid and so athletic that he has kind of a natural athletic rhythm to the way that he does things. You know?
That's a great point.
Like that, like for somebody like Johnson who operates the way that he does, you know, it doesn't matter how fast or how powerful Henry Cejudo is because Demetrius Johnson can figure that out. Like, there's an underlying pattern and rhythm there to be discerned and dealt with. Speed
is always easier to figure out than rhythm. You know, if the rhythm is being manipulated by the person who's displaying it. It's that I did like an experiment in the Gennady Golovkin video I did a long time. But if I give you 4 beats, you can predict the 4th one. You can tell when it's coming. If I give you this, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not really harder to predict that 4 than it is to predict this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can still time it because the timing is the same. The speed doesn't matter. You know, when you have someone who's slow, their timing can still be harder than someone who's really fast because it can be 1, 2, 3, 4. It can be completely erratic and prevent you from predicting those final beats of whatever they're trying to set up.
This was basically like, I'm gonna clap it out, but this was the kind of rhythm that Elliott was giving him. It was.
Yeah,
like that,
basically.
You know? So it was basically rhythmless. There was no underlying pattern to be discerned.
Yeah,
like that's hard for somebody like Johnson, and I think it's hard for people like you and me too because we can recognize it. But like when your mind thrives on systematization, and understanding things according to patterns, like it's difficult to figure out. It's why I'm fascinated by Yoel Romero too, because there is such a lack of underlying pattern to what he's doing. It's funny that's kind of difficult for Johnson to figure out when he couldn't, because I think his other response would have been to kind of try and overpower him, but I bet Elliott was 155 or 160 pounds in the cage.
He looked huge. He looked like Dominic Cruz's size. He looked very large compared to Demetrius.
Yeah, so
I think
he could never make the weight cut again.
Who said that?
Elliott said he could never make the weight cut again.
Really?
Like he's done going to flyweight.
Oh, really?
He said it was just too hard. He said it almost killed him to make the cut.
Okay, well, Tim Elliott at 135, I missed that. But the interesting thing is, I think that's why we saw Demetrius Johnson. It was the most grapple-heavy performance we've seen from him, probably ever, where he was really, really dependent on taking his opponent down. It was like GSP versus Nick Diaz. But very similar in a lot of ways, actually, with the way that Elliott was doing these weird rolls and scrambles, and Johnson was just sort of hopping over from side to side and dragging him back down to his back and using these various threats to just advance position. Because the goal for him was to just prevent Elliott from being able to establish or break any kind of rhythm. When he was on his back, that was when Demetrius Johnson was safe. Even being put in submissions in the first round, it's telling, I think, that he had that first round. He got put in two very tight submissions, a pretty solid guillotine and a very tight Darce choke. And so obviously the most threat he experienced was on the ground, but he went through the rest of the fight knowing that was where he was going to win, because he can solve a dangerous threat as long as he knows when it's coming. And the ground is much more systematic in that way. It's a much slower, more predictable sort of flow to grappling than there is in striking, where things can really surprise you. And when they surprise you, they can really affect your ability to predict the next move. When you're caught in a guillotine, you can still be, especially if you're Demetrius Johnson and you're super calm, you can still be planning for the next choke that's going to come after it. Whereas if you get caught with a right hand clean on the chin that you didn't see coming, your ability to plan is compromised. So Demetrius Johnson got into trouble on the ground, but consistently pursued that phase and I think it was really because that's where he could figure Tim Elliott out. And if he had struck with him, we may have seen a really, really close fight for many rounds, because he never really looked to get his timing on the feet, or rather he couldn't really get Tim Elliott's timing.
Yeah, I think also I would be surprised if Demetrius Johnson were going out of his way to fight in a small cage again after this.
Oh yeah, I was thinking that just as the fight was starting. I was like, oh, we're in the small cage here. This could be interesting, because the big thing for Elliott is, can he pressure Johnson? And of course, the thing we pointed out, the reactive takedowns really changed that, and they did. But it forced Demetrius Johnson to be a lot more reactive than he likes to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. Like, do you think there are some underlying lessons to take from this as far as how we evaluate Demetrius Johnson? Like, do you think less of him for having gone to a 49-46 decision with the guy who was out of the UFC a while ago?
No, not at all. I've always thought Tim Elliott was a solid prospect, and that he just needed basically a gentler touch to get there. And I think he has now arrived as a guy who can be a solid contender either in this division or at 135. I think he's a tough matchup, and he was even before he was ready for this level. He was a fairly tough matchup for a lot of really good fighters. Mm-hmm. So no, it doesn't change my perspective on this. It does kind of make me think that I would definitely pick Dominic Cruz over Demetrius Johnson, though.
Oh, I would have picked Cruz over him again anyway. That's the fight I want to see.
I think I would have too, but it kind of makes me confident in it, seeing how Demetrius, because if he can't out wrestle the guy like that and he's struggling with the timing, I wouldn't be surprised if Demetrius Johnson could adjust to that timing on the feet if he had to, and that he could turn in a good 4th and 5th round. But I'm not confident that he could win the first 3 with someone who basically does what Elliott does, but a lot better and more creatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be I want to find out. Definitely. That's the thing. Like, even if I were going to pick Cruz confidently, and I would pick Cruz confidently, conversely though, I have no real desire to see Mighty Mouse fight Cody Garbrandt if Garbrandt like lands the knockout shot and walks away with the title. That's not a fight I want to see.
I think he would beat Cody Garbrandt. I kind of want to see it now, actually, now that I think of it.
Really? I mean, I think you would have to put a lot of money out there for Mighty Mouse to want to fight Cody Garbrandt because it strikes me as like a fairly high risk. And
definitely.
Aside from, I don't know. But I think as a kind of a challenge, like as a matchup of like really smart fighters who have really insane styles, like so far ahead of their time styles, like that's the fight that I want to see. But I understand that I'm probably in the minority about that.
Yeah. What about Cruz Johnson?
Yeah, it seemed like there was some real pushback. Like people were not all that interested in seeing that fight.
That's
after
insane
this. Like,
to me.
Cruz is too big. Cruz is too big. Like, well, yeah, he probably is, but like, I still want to see it. Yeah,
but also he would let Demetrius Johnson pressure more than Elliott did, just as he did in their first fight. I think Cruz certainly has good defensive footwork and everything, but he will fight more defensively. Will give opportunities to Demetrius Johnson to control the sort of directionality of the fight. So I still want to see it. Absolutely. I think that's one of the best fights they can make. But then finally, we have to get to the flyweight co-main event, Joseph Benavidez versus Henry Cejudo. Barn burner of a fight. Split decision with a point deduction in the first round. I missed a fair portion of the second round because certainly my very illegal stream that I was using to watch the fight was skipping out in the second. So I missed a few segments and didn't turn in the score live. But I kind of felt that Cejudo got the first and third rounds. So I thought it would be a draw.
First and second round?
I gave him the third. I thought he won the third on body shots. And he actually, Fight Metric has him scoring more shots in that round. I think Benavidez probably got the nod and earned a lot of fan scorecards and media scorecards because he was landing the flashier head strikes. But I gave a lot of credit to those clean body kicks that Cejudo was landing. And unfortunately, the commentary was giving a lot of credit to Benavidez's response body kicks, but he wasn't really landing many of them. He was catching Cejudo's arms, and I don't score those. A lot of people score anything that hits this portion of the body. It does have an effect, but if I'm watching a boxing match, even if I know a guy is hitting the other guy's shoulder because he wants to wear him out, it's still not a scoring blow to me. It's blocked. It's its own reward. So that's how I feel about blocked body kicks, and I thought that Cejudo with his body work won the third, but most people thought that he maybe won the first two, and that Benavidez pulled away in the third. It was either way a really entertaining fight. I guess I can say now I scouted for Henry Cejudo for this fight, and it could not have been more gratifying. Maybe unless he'd gotten a win, that would have been very gratifying. But to see him come out so different to past performances and be so effective, at least in the early going, was pretty cool. To see him
this was something that we talked about in last week's show leading up to this fight, and like. There, for whatever reason, there seemed to be an assumption that the Henry Cejudo that we were going to see against Joseph Benavidez was the Henry Cejudo that we saw against Demetrius Johnson.
I would have been surprised if he was exactly the same, because I think Henry Cejudo is the kind of guy who he takes that loss and he's like, no, I'm not a loser. I'm gonna fix this, and I'm gonna come out with a different approach.
Well, and also he's just raw in his career. He'd only been fighting for a little over 3 years when he fought Mighty Mouse. Yeah. Like, this is a guy that we should still expect to be making substantial leaps from fight to fight. Like, I scored this as a draw. I thought that Cejudo won the first two, but every round aside from the first one was close. Shouts to Glenn Trowbridge somehow for scoring the fight 30-26. With scoring the first round for Benavidez, a round in which he was knocked down and thoroughly outstruck.
Baffling. I did think the first round was actually close, except that there was a knockdown. I thought it was
close aside from the knockdown.
Exactly.
But like if it's a close round and one guy gets knocked down.
Right, exactly. But the point is the entirety of the fight was very competitive. And the only thing that made any of the rounds really concrete to me was the fact that there was like the only clear round was the first with that knockdown. And then there was a point deduction. So it ended up being a really weird, difficult fight to score. One where I could not, even having a vested interest in seeing Cejudo win, I couldn't possibly complain about the scorecards going either way.
Yeah, I thought kind of as I was watching this fight, I thought Joe B looked a little diminished from previous performances, but if that's the case, I think he's making up for it with better craft. Like Dwayne Ludwig is definitely doing good things with him, and also I thought in hindsight maybe because Cejudo was so fucking fast and so powerful and so strong, like by far the best athlete at 125 pounds. Like, just an absurd, ridiculous specimen. I think kind of by comparison, Benavidez came off looking maybe a little worse than he would have in a vacuum.
Whereas Benavidez looks really smooth against someone more on like an average athletic level, average for an elite MMA fighter. But you compare him to a guy like Zach Makovsky, he looks really smooth and fast.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't want to go overboard. I think there's a chance that Benavidez's reflexes are maybe slowing a little bit. He's 32.
Yeah, I think it's
for
happening.
10 years.
I saw some signs back when he fought Ian McCall, I want to say.
Really? I didn't see it quite back that far, but maybe when he fought Ali Baggs.
Sure. Yeah, there was a good one. Yeah, Bogatinov was not an impressive performance, really, from either guy. But for a couple years now, maybe not as far as the Ian McCall fight. Yeah, that might be wrong. I might be misremembering. But for a little while now, it's kind of seemed like Benavidez is slowing down a bit, which is not surprising, as you said, given his age and his level of experience. But the craft, I really thought, I think people saying that about this fight, that, oh, Benavidez looked really shop-worn, I think that is taking away some credit from what Cejudo did so well. Because Cejudo came out, he pressured Benavidez, which was a big thing that I thought would work, having scouted Benavidez. Because Benavidez likes to be the one either in open space, picking and choosing, or coming forward. And so Benavidez had to fight in an uncomfortable style and really rely on craft and experience to overcome that, because he spent most of the fight going backwards and most of the fight being hit every single time he went to the clinch, which was another big thing. Benavidez has this very wrestling approach to the clinch. We thought that knees might work against him to his body and head as he's leaned forward. Cejudo went for those constantly. And so there was really no range that probably felt really safe for Joe Benavidez. And so to me, this is a fight that makes me think, wow, Joe Benavidez is really good. Look how impressive he is, because he fought a completely uncomfortable style against a really tough, younger, fresher opponent who really wanted to get back on the winning track, and he still found a way to win, or at least fight his way to a fight that felt like a very competitive draw after a really rough first round.
Yeah, this occurred to me again after the fight, and as we've been talking now, it's kind of reinforced this impression in my head. If this had been a 5-round flyweight title fight, we'd be talking about what a great division flyweight is. Yeah.
I wish this was our 5-round fight. This was one of those fights that really made me wish for 5 rounds for any bout with title implications of any kind. I want to see top 10 fighters in 5-round fights.
You and I have been a proponent of that since basically the first time we did this show together, because I think we were talking about it was one of the very early fights that we were talking about. It was like a co-main event on like a Fox show or something that we thought was a fantastic fight, and we're like, why isn't that 5 rounds? That was one of the very early shows we did together.
It wasn't Bader Davis, was it? Because that one should have been 5 rounds.
It may have been that one. I'm not sure. It was early on, but so we are on the record and have been for several years now as proponents of that idea. I just want to throw that out there.
Who wouldn't have wanted to see 2 more rounds of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, but I think it goes to show just the Demetrius Johnson effect on this division, that flyweight isn't that exciting, or it's not that interesting. It's like, well, part of that is because we know that both of these guys got fucking jackhammered by Demetrius Johnson.
It's not that the fights aren't good. I think they're usually, most flyweight fights are really fun to watch. It's that they feel like they have no relevance, because everyone knows no matter who, it's like, oh yeah, whoever wins, they're just going to lose to Demetrius. It's not their fault. It's their, and I don't think it's even I don't think it's even a bad division. I think the top 10 at flyweight is really solid.
It needs more depth, which hopefully, if assuming they signed some of the guys from the season of The Ultimate Fighter, I sincerely hope they did. I don't know. I haven't seen them.
They put them on some future cards. Guys like Pantoja and stuff like that. They're on some upcoming cards.
Okay, fantastic. Because that's what it needs. It's not that there's nothing wrong with the top 10 in that division. It's just there's only 25 guys in the UFC. Yeah. Well, yeah, when you're making matchups in a division, the more guys you add, the more combinations you get exponentially reaching out from there, and that's what you need to make a division viable. It's like bantamweight a few years ago. We felt like we'd seen every fight. Well, that was kind of because we had seen every fight. Yeah. And so, but once you add more talent, once you add more depth to it, the division kind of overnight can become much, much, much more interesting. Agreed. Over the course of a year, if you have 100 flyweight fights or like 80 flyweight fights instead of having, 25, 30 flyweight fights, things are suddenly much different.
Yeah, it's like parallel universes. Just blossoms out. All the possibilities you won't know until you just add 10 more fighters to the division. And even with piss poor matchmaking, just let them sort it out. You'll be amazed at how many more potential storylines you have going forward. How many more narratives you have to follow in the division.
Yeah, exactly.
So great fights, fantastic ones to look forward to. And I thought that whole card really was very solid. I was not disappointed that I tuned in. So good showing from the flyweights. Champion Demetrius Johnson still making everything feel pointless, but it's not anyone else's fault. Benavidez and Cejudo deserve a lot of respect for that performance. A really fun fight from both guys. And that will about do it for today's show. Before we wrap up, Pat, what are you doing this week?
I'm doing a fair bit of stuff this week. I've got a complete guide to UFC 206 coming out. I will have a in-depth breakdown of the main event on Bleacher Report. I'll have an in-depth breakdown of Pettis Holloway with GIFs on the Washington Post. And then I'll have a little kind of more narrative, kind of technical piece on the rise of Max Holloway, the improvements he's made over the years, coming out on Bleacher Report on Friday. Also, I'm doing a new episode of The Fall of Rome, probably. I think I'm shooting for Wednesday or Thursday for that, and we'll be talking about the Huns. So if you like talking about composite bows and horse archers and steppe empires, then that could be your jam.
Are you going to use the phrase Parthian shot in your show, Pat?
I would be damned if I wouldn't use the phrase Parthian shot. Connor, what do you take me for?
Not a charlatan, that's for damn sure. As long as you mention the Parthian shot, I will be happy. So great, good stuff coming from Pat Wyman as usual. If you're sensing some resentment in my voice, it is there. Pat is so goddamn prolific that I always look like a fool compared to him, but what can I do? I'm not really sure what I got coming out this week. That Andre Ward Kovalev breakdown video, I think we're probably past the point where HBO are going to be going crazy, copyright striking everything that shows up on YouTube, so that should be coming out this week. And a full preview of UFC 206 as well for me on SureDog.com, and then something on UFC 206 on Bloody Elbow. I haven't not yet decided, but I will be doing something on that card because it deserves something written about it. So that's about it. Thank you everybody for joining us. Want to plug one more time our $3 premium bonus content. $3 a month gets you 2 extra episodes. It'll be a lot of interviews, special interviews with people, in-depth discussions, and some fun topics that maybe don't make it into the cut of this more sort of rigidly scheduled regular episodes. So you'll get 2 extra episodes every month for just $3. We appreciate your support, and we are happy to bring you guys... Ooh, oh my God, I'm hitting my mic over here. We are happy to bring you guys lots more episodes for your help. Also, $5 and $20 patrons on Patreon. Send us your questions and topic suggestions. Give us a message on Patreon. We will get to those on future episodes. Other than that, that's about it. You can send us other questions, concerns, whatever, via social media. The best way to do that is on Twitter. You can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH, and Pat is at Patrick_Wyman, WYMAN, and that is it for us. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.